A recent study was just the latest showing the presence of carcinogens in ordinary hair products often marketed to Black women. Here to discuss the study and its implications, I'm joined by Dr. LaRae Brown, medical director at UF Women's Health, who also teaches obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Welcome back, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Dr. Kim Barbel Johnson, Director of Community Clinical Trials Administration at Mayo Clinic's Comprehensive Cancer Center. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Johnson, what specifically did this most recent study uncover?
So, the study actually was recently published and has gotten a lot of media attention as it studied synthetic hair products, braiding hair, as we know it in the Black hair consumer community. And what they did was they looked at popular brands of braiding hair and evaluated that hair for the types of things that we know that could be cancer causing. And in doing so, they tested it by various methodologies, looking at the products of the hair and then what happens when you heat the hair or boil the hair and see if there were detectable levels of things like lead and other what we call volatile organic compounds that were detected. And the results were not inconsistent with previous studies that these hair products contain concerning chemicals. And the further concern is that those chemicals can be absorbed through the scalp or be emitted into the environment and cause illness in those who are using it or those who are using the products for extended periods of time. And so the study actually, once again, continued the signs that we've been looking at actually for more than a decade about concerning some unregulated aspects of products within uh, hair products, cosmetic products that are geared to more vulnerable populations like Black women and Afro Latinx community. And so it has now sparked this incredible conversation about who's responsible for making sure that these products are regulated or that the consumer is aware or that the person who is providing the service is adequately providing information to the client who's getting this, and which is more, and Dr. Brown can really speak to this as we're thinking about hair, particularly as a culture of people of color, where hair is so important in how we express ourselves, how we historically have identified. Are there things that we can do to change the narrative about how we actually prepare and groom our hair? And can we do things so that we don't put uh, those who are most vulnerable among the vulnerable, like our children, like babies in utero, at more risk? And so, can we continue this conversation? Can we support the science that adds to this information so that we have specific information that we can use to both steer policy and create policy, and which is more protect patients, protect people.
And I just want to drill down a little bit on the findings so that we're clear on
Mhm.
what this specifically found. The report, the consumer reports, they tested 10 very popular brands of this braiding hair. They found carcinogens in 100% of the synthetic braiding hair samples that they tested. They found lead in 9 of the 10 products. They found, as you mentioned, volatile organic compounds, again, detected in all products. And 3 of them contained benzene, which is a known carcinogen that actually causes a kind of leukemia. Dr. Brown, first of all, tell us a little bit about what the presence of these means and the concerns about exposure.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So you broke it down into the three specific types of potentially dangerous chemicals that they were really kind of eyeing in this study. And first, we can talk about the carcinogens. As you mentioned, they were detected in 100% of the samples. And carcinogens, it's a big fancy word for essentially chemicals that may cause cancer. While there is a spectrum of the different chemicals that they found in the hair products that were analyzed, as you mentioned, some are known carcinogens, while some may have that possibility or that linkage. So that's an important distinction. But of those chemicals that are known, as you mentioned, that is a very, very concerning feature. And the cancer, the type of cancer that you mentioned, it's acute myeloid leukemia. which is a blood cancer, and that's very, very concerning if we know that that chemical is known to cause cancer and it was detected in those hair samples. The other two categories of the harmful chemicals that were noted was lead, and that was present in 9 of the 10 products. As we all know, historically, lead has been found in paint, in construction materials, and to find that product, as Dr. Barbel Johnson mentioned, in hair products that can cause immediate skin irritation or be emitted into and inhaled into the atmosphere, that can be very concerning. And we can talk later about some of the specific health concerns with regards to lead. And the volatile organic compounds, so all of us need to reach back into organic chemistry.
Right.
But essentially, those are compounds that can be released into the atmosphere. So, in many of our traditions and in salons, there is a great deal of preparation to kind of finish the product. It's braiding, but it's also sealing the ends of the hair and maybe boiling the hair. So, you can release some of the products that have been embedded in those hair strands, and that can cause further problems. Acetone is one of the big ones that, when inhaled, the American Lung Association has very clear recommendations for that, and it's very well studied that inhalation of that can be harmful over long periods of time.
And so that would be a concern, as you say, treating the braids sometimes to prevent them from unraveling or to make sure that they attach properly. So if you're heating this product and it is emitting these things, that's not just necessarily a hazard for somebody who's wearing them, but for the person that is perhaps using these products every day in their work.
Yes, definitely. And that's an important distinction, not only for the consumer who is getting the hairstyle, and you have, just as Dr. Bell Johnson mentioned, that immediate contact with the skin or scalp. That's very important, but also the prolonged wearing of braids. So, typically we invest a lot of time and money into these hairstyles so we can keep our hair clean and continue to wear the style for weeks sometimes, so that there's a prolonged exposure there. And then the inhalation risk as well.
And in terms of lead exposure, we do know that there is not a federal limit on lead. It's not regulated in that way, but it is known at almost any level to cause a variety of problems for people. It can cause reproductive issues, it can cause um, nervous system and immune issues, but it's particularly concerning, I believe, with children. So, talk about that if you can, Dr. Barbel Johnson, about children, because sometimes very young kids are getting the hair braided.
Absolutely. And so you're correct. There's absolutely no good level of lead. And so while we have growing evidence for other chemicals, acetone, formaldehyde releasing products, other things that you will read in the science, lead is across the board. We are absolutely clear that there's no good level for exposure. And so having any level of lead present um, should be disclosed, number one, and we should know about that so that we can govern those risks. And like you mentioned, we call these protective hairstyles. And so we, as moms, I have a daughter, I have nieces, I have done my own hair for a long time, and it's hard with making kind of decisions about what you do with hair. And sometimes we often use products, and I don't often turn the label around on a hair product or and read the ingredients. So there are two things. One, is lead present? Would we be able to recognize that there is lead or some other concerning chemical in a product when we purchase the products to use? And so there's a concern that there may be hidden levels of lead that's unregulated. But even if we were to label it in some way, are we informing the consumer? Are we informing the moms that this may have some deleterious impact on their child or on an unborn fetus? So there's a lot of education that we must continue to do in this space. And why? Why? Because of all the things that we've talked about, the neurological impact of these, not only lead, but some of these other toxins that we're talking about. And and especially for kids, because as we know in science, especially with pediatric cancers, it's not the most funded area of research. And so we must be really aggressive and very proactive in protecting that voiceless community, number one. Number two, there's that concern with being able to understand what's going to happen long term. And so oftentimes studies are needed for decades in order to see the longitudinal impact of something. And sometimes that requires a lot of resources to go the long haul. And so we have some really great, studies that are happening in populations of color, but those are longitudinal studies, and we really need the test of time to show those impacts. And unfortunately, by the time we have the hard science to show those things factually, the damage has already been done.
Mhm.
So if we know better, we should do better. As we know about lead, and we have a long way to go across all fronts, both from the regulatory point of view, from the educating of the occupational risk to those who are doing the styling, whether you're professional, occupational, hairstylist, or a mom, as we inform our parents about risk to anything that we're using, from nutrition to hair products, and how that might impact. And, they're often very silent things that, are happening in this space. And so we don't necessarily connect the dots as this has caused that. And so the science actually still needs to be more clear that the presence of these products, as the study revealed, is it truly causative? Is it causative at a certain level that's detected? Do we have the science to say that in that population, this level is the level that we should cut off and be concerned about? Do we have the presence of people of color in these studies that would suggest that the level maybe should be lower, to be of concern? And then is it synergistic? Is it the presence of the product mixed with the genetics of the person, mixed with the environmental exposure? And so it's very complex and complicated, as you look at this space. And so while we know lots about lead, we know lots about formaldehyde releasing products, we know about those 11 or 12 FDA regulated products, and we're able to quantify those things. There's still a long way that we must go. When we look at this country, we must also realize that we're part of a global community. And so in this country, we've regulated a handful compared to the European countries that over 1,000 products are banned from cosmetic and hair products. And yet they're banned for use in their countries, but not banned for use in this country. So they can still manufacture products and export them to countries such as ours. And because they're not banned in our country, we can use them. So it becomes a very complex and complicated topic. And that's why these types of forums, your show, for example, is extremely important, because it allows us to get the message of let's think about it, let's talk about it out to those who are most at risk in our community.
And we should be clear about a couple of things. I mean, none of these things were listed on the ingredients. They're not required to be listed. If something like a VOC, a volatile organic compound, is released, they're not required to say that. Things like fragrance don't have to include what they contain. So there's a lot of ways that things can be in a product and a customer wouldn't know. But if you're just joining us, we were talking about new research into beauty products and concerns about what they contain, including carcinogens. If you'd like to join our conversation, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org or reach out on social media. We have a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. It is very distressing. I saw this study recently. I know of 8 people that have cancer, 2 ovarian, 4 or 5 multiple myeloma, which seems to be very prevalent in African American people, women right now, in case you didn't know. A lot of women went to protective styles because they found out that in the relaxers, which had lye, was, a endocrine disruptor and could cause cancer. I just find it very telling, not odd, that in America we're the guinea pigs, and there's no reason for lead to be in a hair product. Let's just be clear. I know you want to be very scientifically careful, but there's no reason that there should be lead in anything attached to my body. So I just feel like we're the guinea pigs in America. We have very loose regulations compared to European Union. And I just think that people are now I'm going to say causative. You can't. There seems to be a direct correlation of products that can be used. So when we got rid of the lye because they were killing us from cancer, they decided to put it in the hair products that we were using to protect our lives. So I don't think that's a coincidence, but I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist early this morning. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Linda. Your thoughts about that, Dr. Brown?
Yeah, that's very interesting and a common theme among people in our communities. I think one thing that we haven't discussed yet is how much of a big business hair products and cosmetics products are, especially when we are discussing the synthetic hair products that are known to be potentially harmful at this point. African American women and women of African descent are the primary utilizers of these hair products. And in 2023, the U.S. share of that market was 2.7 billion, but in 2029, it's projected to be over $6 billion. So, by any means, if a company can get that margin a little bit better, and like Dr. Barbel Johnson said, synthetic hair products are not very expensive. So you can imagine the volume of usage that occurs in our communities. And it's just very interesting how there's such loose regulations on these things. And it was also eye-opening from the Consumer Reports study. They contacted all 10 companies of the different hair products. Only 2 companies responded, obviously voluntary. One company actually stated that they know what products they use in their manufacturing, but they can't vouch for the other products that are used to maintain when they're storing the products or the finishing touches essentially on those products. So this opens an entire can of worms about the accountability of these companies to the safety of the products that they're selling, both from a consumer standpoint and then just from an ethical standpoint. They, like you said, they have no obligation to list out all of the products, much less what effects those products can have. So, California actually, has some state regulations surrounding lead. So there is some push to include more disclosure, but it would be ideal because just like our caller mentioned, it's lots of cancer, lots of endocrine disorders. So endocrine disorders surrounding hormonal issues, female reproductive disorders, disorders of childbirth or pregnancy. So it's far reaching. The studies, like Dr. Barbel Johnson said, are going to be lagging because some of these effects we won't recognize until 5, 10, 15 years after the exposure. And then it's multifactorial. Your own predisposition to cancer, but how it interacts with these substances is going to be ideal to understand.
It's
Right.
probably worth noting that, some of these products that are used are part of beauty standards that have been, basically dictated by society or imposed on women. Women wearing natural hair until very recently was prohibited in places like the military
Absolutely.
service. So, use of products like a relaxer or a braid in some ways is used by Black women in order to occupy spaces that they wouldn't maybe be welcome in if they were feeling like outsiders or perhaps not, falling into line with some sort of expectation.
Absolutely. There are such systemic parts of this conversation that it's probably owed its own discussion and own show. And while we are talking about hair, you are absolutely correct, not only about hair and presence, but executive presence, involves cosmetic use. I also wanted to say that this is a wonderful topic as we talk about synthetic hair. There are other hair products that we purchase, and so it's important to also recognize that while we're a long way from regulation, there are choices that we can have. Unfortunately, as we've seen in previous models, like with tobacco and other products that have been marketed, that research dynamics have allowed us to see the research where certain communities are actually targeted. Synthetic products, synthetic hair is cheaper than natural hair or human hair. And so the economic aspect of making that choice, the choice between looking good and having a cheaper product, it is not a conspiracy theory. It really is a marketing design, right? And so we have to accept that it is what it is. And so then we have to decide, how do we actually empower? How do we create not only rules and regulations, but how do we empower and give a sense of agency to the women to have these choices, and to change that narrative altogether? And so I don't disagree with the caller whatsoever. In fact, I think we're all on the same page, and I do appreciate the caller's concern. I also wanted to add, though, that a lot of what we know, the temporal association, the timing, we've seen this. We've been watching this play out in the science. And so while it may hit the airways, and this recent study has brought it back to the conversation, if you look through the medical literature, this is not a new concern. And so I think it's about exactly what we're doing. It's about, once we know it, how do we create space and in conversations for this, and how do we trust the Dr. Browns and the Dr. Barbel Johnsons, and create more Dr. Browns and Dr. Barbel Johnsons, so that we're at the table as we're making these decisions in regulatory spaces, in medical spaces, in political spaces. And I think that that is what is also part of this conversation.
It's interesting to that point. I know that Spelman College recently became the first HBCU to launch a cosmetic science program specifically to address these kinds of issues and those disparities. We have a call from Nancy in Atlantic Beach. Good morning, Nancy. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. I want to say good morning also to Dr. Barbel Johnson. This is Nancy, who sends hearts to Joshua every time his picture is on, on
One of
Facebook.
our favorite artists
Yes,
and dance school executives here, and nice to talk to you.
yes, you too, honey. Okay, my question is, Dr. Brown talked about getting the information current in all these executive meetings and that are happening. But my question is, I'm thinking of the young women that I work with. How do we get the message to them? How this call is, this talk is frustrating and fascinating. But what do I do? Okay, I am not a black woman, but I want to know how to get this message across. And I'll take my answer off the line.
I mean,
Nancy,
that's an interesting question, and one I think that probably is a communication that you'd want to handle with a lot of care.
I think it's extremely, it's an incredible question. And, there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think Nancy actually brings up the point that this is not a black or brown conversation. It's an all of us conversation, because health disparities that result impact all of us. The messaging is not just for those who who look like the consumer. The messaging is for all of us who care about the welfare of people and humanity. And so what can we do? We can reach people where they are. The sensitivity, it's not to be judgmental in any space, because people have choice, right? And it's to make sure that we have all of the information that's available to those who are making those choices, so that they can make informed decisions. As you make informed decisions, as my dad used to say, you sleep in the bed that you make, right? So, but we must make sure that there are choices and that there's information. As we look to our community, we must continue to have, maybe not about the hair care product, but let's talk about the increased incidence of cancer in younger people that we don't quite understand. Let's talk about endometrial cancer. Let's talk about fibroids. Let's talk about the things that we actually will probably be more likely to listen to and be at least emotionally connected to, because I think that when you look at the root cause analysis, then we can get to the conversations about all of the things that might be contributing to that. And then we can ask, what are we doing to be part of that conversation and that science? It will help us to get to why we need to be part of clinical trials. It will get us to conversations about the American Cancer Society's Voices study, why those who can be in that study by age inclusion should be part of a simple way to contribute to this information. Real world evidence in real studies, the information that we have from things like the Boston studies, and the largest studies of 56,000 women, 40,000 women came because those women of color chose to be part of trials, and that's how we were able to get information. So let's start with the things that we can do as well as the things that we are concerned about.
I want to take a call from Stanley on the north side. Good morning, Stanley. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, especially Anna. Uh, I'm with the African American Economic Recovery Think Tank. We've been dealing with this issue since 1980 when we saw the change in African American women. Because this issue is deeper than this. What's appalling to me, and I'm a master researcher, that this issue in the African American community, when it comes to these products, has been going on, like I say, since 1980. And it's really for the community to come together and address it. This is a crisis. That's why we've been seeing so many problems when it comes to African American women's, their mental condition because of those products. And I have the data to back it up. Thank you.
Thanks, Stanley. I mean, to his point, some of these things, the science has been around for many years. I can recall the documentary from 2009 that Chris Rock did, where he was showing the impacts of a soda can inside sodium hydroxide, which was at the time very common in relaxers. But, even formaldehyde, which has been shown to be a very hazardous chemical that is contained in some of these products, there's been calls, there's been regulatory demands that it be removed, and it still hasn't been regulated.
Right, right. I think that approaching it from the standpoint of this is going to be a ground up effort is going to be what's most advantageous. And I applaud you, Mr. Stanley, for working in the community to try to ameliorate some of these issues. And I would give credence to our younger generations, as Dr. Barbel Johnson mentioned a little bit earlier. There's been systemic challenges to what is determined to be neat or professional. So that kind of crafted some of the decisions that Black women had to make as we integrated into professional circles, or just the idea of what it meant to be neat. So that, like he mentioned, probably in the late 70s, early 80s, people sort of opened their eyes to a more natural movement. And I feel that our younger generation, and my daughter's going to Spelman College in August, they can take this and run with it. They have been able to craft different norms. And me and Dr. Barbel Johnson are not even that old, but when we did our medical training, the acceptance of different what professional hairstyles meant has morphed over the last, several decades. So I'm hopeful that with standardized educational programs dedicated to looking at these disparities within the cosmetic industry and large volumes of young people who are social media influencers, or just getting that grassroots word out about a more natural approach to cosmetics and hair care, can be the spark that we need within our own community, because trust is a huge issue. So once we can kind of spread that information and plant advocates within the community who can bring that scientific information, and we have cost-effective alternatives or just options to how we deem we can feel beautiful yet be safe, I think that's probably going to be one direction we can take.
Well,
So great. I'm from the Caribbean, so the standard of beauty was different. Having locks and having natural hair was something that was beautiful in my culture. Yet I ironed or hot combed, or whatever the current terminology is, my hair every Sunday after the beach. I didn't do chemical products until I was much older. So again, there are ways to look as you want to look. It's about having the information to know what is the safest alternative.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. It's such an important conversation. We really appreciate you being here. We should say that we have a link on our website that allows you to search for the individual beauty products that you use if you'd like to know more about what's in them. But Dr. Kim Barbel Johnson, Dr. LaRae Brown, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.